Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we are diving into something absolutely fascinating, the deeply researched financial psychology of people born in 1991. If you were born around this time, you already know this group has an incredibly unique relationship with money. By digging into the data, we're going to unpack exactly how a sequence of massive global events forged a mindset that is highly sophisticated, incredibly defensive, and literally standing right at the edge of a massive turning point. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with a generation born into chaos, then move on to financial armor and strengths, check out the cost of caution, and finally wrap up with the wealth accumulation window. Let's kick things off with Section 1, A Generation Born into Chaos, the Economic Crucible of 1991. If you've ever felt economically battered, well, this perfectly visualizes exactly why. It's the sheer volume of once-in-a-lifetime events this cohort has had to navigate. I mean, seemingly every other Tuesday, just trying to start their lives. Picture this. At age 16 and 17, they watched the 2008 global financial crisis just wipe out housing and banks. Then they stepped into the labor market carrying massive student debt against permanently lowered wages. And just as they caught their breath, boom, the 2020 COVID disruption, which was immediately followed by the 2022 inflation and mortgage crisis. It is literally the ultimate financial obstacle course. So, the absolutely crucial question we have to ask ourselves looking at all this history is, how does a generation survive this much financial whiplash? Because, spoiler alert, they didn't just survive, they adapted. Moving on to Section 2, Financial Armor and Strengths, Playing Defense in an Irrational World. And this brings us right to a concept called liquidity preference. Because the 1991 cohort watched investments just vanish overnight during the 2008 crisis, their trauma response was actually highly rational. Hold on to liquid cash. They developed this powerful preference for visible, accessible savings over money locked away in illiquid investments. They needed to literally see the money to know they were safe. But here's the thing, these behaviors aren't mistakes. This is intelligent, heavy financial armor built for a completely unpredictable economy. Think about it. They have extreme debt aversion because they saw leverage completely destroy wealth. They have above-average financial literacy because, well, they realized no pensions were coming to save them. And they fully embraced income diversification through the gig economy because relying on just one employer felt way too dangerous. And they didn't just change how they work, they actually changed how they spend. They helped pioneer what we call the experience economy. Instead of hoarding objects, there's this systematic preference for spending money on lived experiences and non-traditional lifestyles. And the incredible part? Behavioral research actually links this exact pattern to higher long-term life satisfaction. They essentially figured out that markets can crash, but nobody can repossess a memory. But now we hit Section 3. The cost of caution, when defense becomes a trap. Check out the tension here. On one side, you've got the strengths that kept you safe, things like debt aversion and just being grateful to have a job. But on the other side, that safety net kind of becomes a cage. Being grateful turns into career under negotiation. That liquidity preference, it turns into really expensive cash hoarding. The very behaviors that shielded you from the storm are now actively compressing your wealth potential. This whole dynamic is known as loss aversion. Basically, because of that early market trauma, the pain of losing money feels twice as intense as the joy of gaining it. And this produces a systematic underinvestment in equities. You avoid the stock market to avoid the pain, right? But in doing so, you completely miss out on the long-term compound growth you desperately need. If you have ever felt guilty about hoarding cash, well, this right here shows exactly why. Idle cash offers incredibly low growth and is quietly being eaten alive by inflation. Meanwhile, an optimal equity allocation offers high compound growth. A massive emergency fund totally makes sense when you have low income and high instability. But as your income grows, the opportunity cost of leaving that cash sitting idle becomes massively expensive. It's the invisible theft of failing to play offense. And this over-applied caution bleeds into other invisible traps too. That grateful to have a job mindset, it compounds over a 30-year career into thousands and thousands of dollars in lost wages. Heavy student loans compress the timeline for retirement savings, meaning investments are started late. And finally, the brutal reality of forced housing timing meant many had to buy at the absolute peak pricing of 2020 to 2022, or face being permanently priced out entirely. All right, let's move to our final part, Section 4, the wealth accumulation window, 2026 to 2035, 35 to 44. This specific age range is the absolutely critical financial consolidation period. We're talking about the ultimate make or break window for the 1991 babies. Everything that happened before was practice. This right here is the main event. Because get this, despite all the chaos we've just reviewed, Federal Reserve data shows something incredible. Elder millennials are currently the fastest wealth accumulating subgeneration. Yeah, you heard that right. After all those economic beatdowns, this cohort is moving into a position of immense, accelerating financial power. And here is the exact accumulation formula making that possible. Step 1. You hit career seniority, meaning your income growth peaks. Step 2. This higher income intersects with heavily reduced student debt loads, creating a sudden burst of cash flow. Step 3. If you take that freed up cash and apply it to compounding investments rather than hoarding it, your wealth accelerates exponentially. The math is finally in your favor if you actually take action. The research makes a massive claim about this exact moment. It literally notes that deliberate decisions made in this window will compound for the following 2 decades in ways that completely dwarf any individual year's decisions before or after. Basically, what you do next matters most. Negotiating that salary today or moving that hoarded cash into an index fund today, these deliberate choices will completely overshadow the chaos of your 20s. So, I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought. Your financial caution definitely helped you survive the past, but will you let it cost you your future? You've built incredible armor. You've survived the crucible, but the storm has passed. And maybe it's time to take the armor off and start building the kingdom. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time.